The sharp, stinging heat on my left cheek was the only thing that felt real as the sound of a hand hitting flesh echoed through the vaulted ceilings of that Park City dining room. For a split second, the world just stopped. The laughter of 50 of the wealthiest people in the state vanished, replaced by a vacuum of silence so thick I could hear the expensive candles flickering on the table. I'm Katrina. I'm 32 years old, and in that single, brutal moment, I realized that the woman standing across from me wasn't just my sister, she was my executioner. Or so she thought. Everything had been perfect, at least according to the carefully curated image my family fought so hard to maintain. I was moving through the crowd, navigating the maze of designer gowns and diamond watches, carrying a silver tray of vintage red wine. A guest, leaning a bit too heavily into his fourth glass of scotch, stumbled into my shoulder. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was enough. The crimson liquid arched through the air, a violent splash of red across the pristine white silk of my sister's dress, the one she'd been bragging about for 3 hours. Bianca didn't even blink. She didn't check to see if I was okay or if the tray had cut my hand. Her hand just flew. The slap was faster than a heartbeat, fueled by years of unchecked entitlement. My head snapped to the side, and the entire room watched as she screamed, her face contorting into something unrecognizable. "Watch where you're going. Are you blind or just stupid?" The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing me down into the expensive rug. But what happened next was worse. My mother didn't rush to my side. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She hurried to Bianca, frantically dabbing at the silk with a napkin, her eyes darting toward the guests to see who had witnessed the mess. Then she turned to me. Her voice wasn't filled with motherly concern. It was dripping with a disdain so cold it made the winter air outside feel warm. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and hissed in front of everyone, "Apologize to your sister right now, or you can get out of this house." I looked at my father, the man whose business I had quietly saved from bankruptcy 5 years ago. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just walked to the massive oak front door, pulled it open, and stood there like a statue of ice. He was inviting the freezing mountain night in to replace me. I realized then that I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a tool, an ATM, a safety net they were tired of looking at. Have you ever felt the exact second your heart hardens into a diamond? I stepped out into the snow without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a terrifying, crystalline clarity. They thought they were throwing out a nuisance, but they were actually evicting the only thing standing between them and the gutter. But before I tell you how I dismantled their lives by sunrise, I need you to stay with me, because what I did next wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. If you believe that respect is earned and never a birthright, hit that like button and subscribe, because my journey for justice was just beginning. The leather steering wheel felt like a weapon in my hands as my car sliced through the blinding whiteout of a Park City blizzard. The physical sting on my cheek was already being replaced by a calculated, cold fury. As I navigated the treacherous, winding curves leading toward my penthouse, the silence of the cabin was my only companion. It was ironic, really. My family had spent the last 5 years living a lie, and they'd finally started to believe it. I remembered the day my father sat at my kitchen table, his head in his hands, smelling of cheap gin and desperation. The real estate market had collapsed, and his empire was nothing but a house of cards. He begged me to buy the villa so his social circle would never know he was broke. I was the one who quietly signed the deed. I was the one who funded Bianca's boutique chain while she traveled to Paris on my dime. They lived in a palace I paid for, ate food I bought, and wore clothes I provided, yet they treated me like an intruder in my own home. By the time I reached my apartment, the plan was already fully formed in my mind. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my office, pushed aside a large abstract painting, and opened the hidden steel safe. Inside wasn't just money, it was leverage. I pulled out the thick leather binder containing the property deeds and the business contracts. My finger traced the bold capital letters on the deed for the estate at 4500 Silver Creek Road. Sole owner, Katrina Miller. They were living there under a zero-rent lease agreement, a document they clearly hadn't read in years. It contained a code of conduct clause, a legal safety net I'd inserted just in case their entitlement ever turned dangerous. Tonight, they hadn't just broken my heart, they had violated a legally binding contract. I flipped to Bianca's boutique loans. Clause 14B, immediate repayment of the entire principal plus interest if the beneficiary engaged in conduct detrimental to the investor's dignity or reputation. She had physically assaulted her primary investor in front of 50 credible witnesses. She didn't just ruin a dress, she ruined her future. It was past midnight when I dialed my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. He was a man who didn't ask questions, he just executed. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone far more dangerous. "I need to apologize for the hour, but it's time. Execute the asset recovery protocol, immediately." "Is this regarding the Park City contingency, Katrina?" he asked, the sound of a pen scratching paper audible over the line. "Yes, everything by the book, but with maximum velocity. I want them to wake up in a different world tomorrow morning. Draft the 30-day eviction notice. Initiate the recall on the boutique loans. And, Mr. Sterling, cut the utilities at 8 a.m. "It will be done," he replied. I hung up and stared out the window at the city lights. Have you ever wondered how thin the line is between a comfortable life and absolute ruin? I was about to show them exactly how thin it was. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable, and they were about to be very, very lonely. The next morning, as the first weak rays of winter sun touched the glass walls of the villa, the nightmare officially began. This house was a smart home, a technological marvel of automated warmth and seamless luxury. But technology is a fickle god. At exactly 8:01 a.m., the heartbeat of the house died. The gentle hum of the geothermal heating vanished. The recessed lights flickered and stayed dark. The high-speed fiber optic internet, the very oxygen Bianca breathed for her social media vanity, was severed at the source. The villa was no longer a palace, it was a glass-walled refrigerator. I could almost hear Bianca's scream from miles away. She would have been in her master suite, wrapped in silk, trying to post photos of her perfect Thanksgiving. I can imagine her stomping onto the landing, frantically tapping her phone. "Mom, why is the Wi-Fi down? I can't post." Our mother, Susan, would have been at the dead thermostat, her fingers trembling as the temperature inside began to drop toward the freezing point. Bianca, fueled by a caffeine-free rage, would have switched her phone to cellular data to complete a $5,000 handbag purchase, a little retail therapy for her bruised ego. But when she hit that place order button, she wouldn't get a confirmation. She'd get a crimson notification that would make her heart stop. Card declined, account frozen. Downstairs, my father would have been manhandling the light switches, his face a mask of confusion and growing dread. "Susan, did you forget the bills again?" he would have barked, still clinging to the delusion that this was just a clerical error. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Not a utility van, a sleek black sedan. My father likely walked to the door with his chest puffed out, ready to demand an apology from whatever clerk had messed up his morning. But the man in the charcoal suit didn't offer a handshake. He handed over a thick red envelope with a court seal. Notice of termination of tenancy, 30 days to vacate. The realization must have hit like a physical blow. The power outage wasn't an accident. The frozen cards weren't a glitch. It was a declaration of war. They all grabbed their phones to call me, to scream, to manipulate, to beg. But all they got was the hollow, rhythmic ringing of a line that would never answer them again. 2 days later, I was sitting in my glass-walled conference room, watching the city pulse below me. Rachel, my chief accountant and only real friend, walked in. She didn't have her usual coffee. She had a stack of black binders that looked like they weighed 100 pounds. "Katrina," she said, her voice unusually soft, "you need to see this. We started the forensic audit on the boutique accounts like you asked." She laid the documents out. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll as I looked at the rows of red ink. Bianca hadn't just been bad at business. She was a predator. She had been siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars through a web of fake vendor invoices. She was paying consulting fees to offshore accounts and withdrawing massive amounts of cash for inventory that didn't exist. She was living a billionaire's life while the business I funded was drowning in debt. She had lied to my face every single month, telling me about market downturns while she bought $10,000 watches in Vegas. But then, Rachel turned the page. There's more. My breath caught in my throat. At the bottom of every unauthorized budget overrun, next to the company stamp, was a signature. A looping, elegant script I'd known since I was a child. It was my mother's signature. Susan hadn't just known. She had facilitated it. She used her limited power of attorney to override the safety checks I'd put in place. She had sat across from me at dinner, watched me work 80-hour weeks to keep the family afloat, and all the while, she was helping Bianca rob me blind. The betrayal didn't just cut, it cauterized. I threw my pen across the room, the ink staining the wall like a permanent bruise. My mother signed off on this? She knew? She knew, Rachel whispered. And Katrina. There's a pattern to the cash withdrawals. They match the repayment cycles of known underground loan sharks. Bianca isn't just a thief. She's in deep with people who don't care about family names. Desire whispers louder than guilt, and Bianca's desire for a life she didn't earn had led her straight into the mouth of a shark. And by cutting off the money 2 days ago, I hadn't just stopped the bleeding. I had pulled the plug on her life support. 3 days after the audit, the storm finally arrived at my office. My receptionist called me, her voice shaking. "Katrina, your parents are here. They're causing a scene in the lobby." I walked to the mezzanine. There they were. My father was shouting about elder abuse and filial duty, while my mother was weeping theatrically for the benefit of my clients. They were trying to weaponize shame, the only tool they had left. I didn't argue. I had security bring them into the executive conference room, not to talk, but to contain the rot. When they walked in, they expected a groveling daughter. Instead, they found a video camera already recording and Mr. Sterling sitting with a legal notepad. Bianca was the worst of them. She looked unhinged. Her hair was a mess, her eyes bloodshot. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice a shrill, desperate rasp. "Unfreeze the cards, Katrina. You have no idea who is looking for me. I need that money now." I didn't say a word. I just pressed a button on the remote. The projector flared to life, filling the room with the forged invoices and the withdrawal slips bearing my mother's signature. The silence that followed was deafening. Susan collapsed into a chair, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. My father looked from the screen to his wife, his mouth working but no sound coming out. "Katrina, please," my father finally stammered, his voice losing its edge. "This is a family matter. We can fix this at home. Don't involve the law." I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor like a gunshot. "Embezzlement isn't a family matter, Dad. It's a felony. Fraud isn't a family matter. It's a prison sentence." I looked them each in the eye. "You have 2 choices. You vacate my house quietly within the next week, or I hand this digital file to the Economic Crimes Division. If I do that, Bianca isn't going to a boutique. She's going to a cell. And Mom, you'll be right there next to her." They left that room like ghosts, defeated, broken, and finally, for the first time in their lives, quiet. The final week of the eviction notice was a countdown to a tragedy they had written themselves. The atmosphere in that villa must have been suffocating. While my parents packed their lives into boxes, Bianca was a caged animal. The loan sharks had sent a final message to her burner phone: $50,000 in 24 hours, or she'd never walk again. She waited until 3 a.m. In the dead of night, she crept into my parents' room. She moved like a shadow, her hands shaking as she pulled out the fireproof lockbox my mother kept under the bed. The combination was something she'd stolen years ago. Inside was everything: my parents' entire retirement fund, cash they'd pulled from their accounts in a panic, and the family heirlooms, our grandmother's diamonds, my father's gold watch. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll pay you back," she whispered into the dark. It was the last lie she'd ever tell them. She took every cent, every piece of gold. She crept to the garage, manually lifted the door, and sped off into the night, leaving her parents with nothing but an empty metal box and a debt they could never pay. When my mother found the box at dawn, her scream was a sound I'll never forget, even though I wasn't there to hear it. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had sacrificed the daughter who loved her for the one who would devour her. The 30th day arrived. The gray sky felt heavy, as if the clouds themselves were tired of the drama. I drove to the estate one last time. The sheriff was already there, his deputies moving through the rooms with clinical efficiency. My parents were standing on the sidewalk, clutching plastic bags like refugees. My father saw my car and ran to the window, his face pressed against the glass. "Katrina, please, we have nothing. Bianca took it all. She robbed us." He was sobbing, his breath fogging the window of my SUV. I sat there, my hands steady on the wheel, my sunglasses hiding the fact that I felt nothing. No joy, no hate, just the quiet satisfaction of a job finished. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't give them a penny. Instead, I signaled Mr. Sterling. He walked over and handed my father a small white card. "What is this?" my father gasped. "The address for the city's emergency homeless shelter," Mr. Sterling said. "The bus leaves from the corner in 20 minutes. I watched them in my rear-view mirror as I drove away. Two small, shivering figures fading into the white landscape. They had spent their lives building a monument to themselves, and it had finally collapsed on top of them. It's been 3 months now. The snow has melted, and the world is green again. Bianca was caught near the Nevada border trying to use a fake passport. She's currently awaiting trial for grand larceny and fraud. My parents are in a 1-bedroom subsidized apartment, spending their days blaming each other in a room that smells like regret. I sold the villa. I didn't want the memories. I used the money to start a foundation for women who are trying to escape toxic families, women who need a bridge to a life they actually own. True loyalty must be earned through mutual respect, and it is never your obligation to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is pick up the scissors and cut the cord. I'm curious, did I go too far? Would you have saved them one last time, or would you have handed them that shelter card too? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've ever had to choose yourself over a toxic family, let me know your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more journeys toward justice. You aren't alone.